afternoon, class.
I just want to finish a few more
Today,
things
I'd like to talk about
Persia. I had to
the
get off for 1
Assyrians
second.
and the Persians.
So,
I don't know if I told you this, but the author, if I did,
culture became very
that I'm repeating myself.
Zoroastrianism,
But the author of the book
if you will,
mentioned that
became
even
very
though some Western
pervasive,
civ classes begin with
universal,
it believed
it's taken us
in
a month to get up
a
to them,
personal
but
God.
for good reason.
Often it was
We
contrasting.
learned
in these 2
for
months,
example, the
talking
good
about
God,
the background,
Ahura Mazda, the wise
how the
Lord,
Greeks
the
got
tragedy,
where they
the
got,
bad
which
God,
we'll talk about
Ahriman,
towards the middle
so it
of
was
the
kind
week,
of black and
which
white,
is chapter 3.
contrasting,
And then we're going to be going a little bit faster.
good
because
and
now I
evil,
think you've got the
etc.
background.
But the interesting
I
thing
believe,
about
and
this
the
religion,
professor,
if you will,
is
it was a
Simons
personal
and Cole,
religion. It
wasn't that.
of
It's
the
good to go
state,
through this
it
because you
didn't
learn
belong
that
to any particular region.
the origin of Western
It,
civilization is not
just
stressed,
free
will,
old white people
and
resurrection,
actually
and personal,
very diverse.
sacrifice,
and 2 more
and
communities
personal
we're going
growth
to
and
discuss
development.
today. One is called the
that's
Assyrian
sort of the story of,
Empire, and the other is called the
Zoroastrianism.
Persian Empire.
And what we believe is that this is really
before
the
we go
first
into them,
kind,
let's just review where
or
we
the
came
first
from.
inkling
And it'll
of
start to come together for
monotheism,
you
the
in a
belief
second. We
in
talked
one
about
God,
the
sort of
Hebrew kingdom,
universal,
its unity. We went
belief
through the
that these
kingdoms
Persians
of
had.
Samuel,
Before I finish
Saul,
with the Persians,
David, and Solomon, and we
I
know that by
just
the time
want to
Solomon
go-
died, 937,
Cyrus,
the 2 kingdoms had
died
unified
in
kingdom were
approximately
at each other's
530.
throats. After
Falling
he
apart,
died,
there was a
the
struggle
2
for
tribes
power,
down south,
really a
and
civil
the
war for
10
about
tribes up
11
north
years.
really
His
were
son
divided.
couldn't control
Their
Cambyses
wealth
could not
was
stay in power.
diminishing after
So
Saul.
somebody in the
Solomon
royal
died,
family, his
and
name
that
is
is where we're
Darius.
at.
You've
So
probably
let's
heard
look
of him.
at Assyria
He
for a
comes to
minute,
the
and you'll see how
throne,
that relates.
and
He has a very
long
the Hebrew kingdom in
rule,
one
about
second.
35 years, we believe.
Remember we talked about the
and from
Assyrians,
about
Sargon,
521 to
the
486
unbelievable
civilization
he really
that they
took
had
as
had.
his inspiration.
And now
his
we're going to
uncle or
see
cousin,
that there's what we
Cyrus,
call a neo,
and
meaning he had a
new,
light touch. He was
N-E-O,
believed in
Assyrian
Zoroastrianism.
It
the
evolved
Persian
after
rule,
the Sea People,
who
had even
should
arrived
be,
in Assyria, and they had struggled
tolerant
to survive.
and forgiving, and for
The
that reason,
first
of course, many
ruler after
subjects
the Sea
in
Peoples
all of the
arrived
lands
from
that he covered
883 to
loved him.
859 BCE
Is this
and,
guy named Asona
he allowed
Sirpal
different
II.
people in the kingdom,
He really
in all the
gathered
conquered territories,
the
to
Assyrian
continue
army
to
and
have
their
people together,
own,
and he fought
leadership, their
to
own
really
perfect
the
local
army,
cultures.
the
Of
military,
course, people
and to become
adored
to make
him and the
Assyria
Persian king
powerful
for that
again.
reason.
The other thing
in
about
744,
Darius that is interesting
you
is
could read who
he was a builder.
took
He
over,
built
but
another
Persepolis, which is
man
Persia
who wasn't as
city,
rough, and
he ordered a canal to
savage
be dug
as
between
Assurbanipal,
the Nile to
second,
the
his
Red
name
Sea.
is Tiglath
Why? So that they could trade with
and
the
he
Egyptians
again was a
easier.
transition figure to
He
Sargon
increased
II.
agriculture production.
Why
so there
did this
wasn't
leader
as
take on
much
the name of
hunger in
Sargon?
his territory?
Because
and
everybody
he
in
created,
Assyria
perhaps the most
admired
important
the
thing
first
we
king
know of
Sargon.
is something called
So
the
Sargon
Royal
II,
Road.
who lived
It
from
was approximately
722
1,600
705
miles
BCE.
Of
course, he
and it
descended
went
that
all the
he,
way
he
from
claimed he
Lydia,
descended
almost
from,
all the way to the Persian
Akkad,
Gulf,
and
to
what's interesting about him, as your
and all
book
the way
tells you,
through
is that
Persia.
Sargon II
he
created
history
really the first
by
normalized
calling
postal
on
system,
the
which is interesting.
people's
It kind of reminds me
memories
of
the Pony
Sargon I
Express here,
and
every
how
single
generous he
ride,
was,
and
and
what a
along
great
this
leader he was,
to
road, and
manipulate
therefore
the
postal
people
route
again.
was exactly
Now that's
one
interesting.
day's
In some way,
ride.
therefore,
So
he
there
is
was
calling
mail
on history
every day.
to use
That
this
was the
history
way in which
as a
the
political
postal
tool.
system was
He
set
extends
up.
the boundaries of the empire, so he was
Excuse me.
definitely
Darius
trying to
face
build
some
military
empire,
uprisings,
and
but
he went all the way
he
to
was
Western
generally a
Iran,
humanitarian
into the Mediterranean, and into parts
and,
of Egypt.
he
really
went into
improved
the
the
Hebrew
culture
kingdom
of the
of
Persian
Israel.
people. And he
to this
destroys
day,
it.
of course, Cyrus
in
and
Elam.
Darius,
And he begins to
are,
also, the kingdom of Israel was, of course, the
idealized
northern
within
kingdom.
Persia.
And he also
Okay, I will come
subjugates
back
the
with another
kingdom
tape in
of
2 minutes
Judah, the
to just
southern,
finish up this chapter and discuss
in
monotheism.
722.
Now, I just want to say a
style.
few things.
Okay,
Just
thank you.
hold those thoughts. This was a military dictatorship. The king was the monarch. He told everyone that he was the earthly representative of the god Assur and its chief priest. He had oracles and priests. It was a huge bureaucracy. The good things he did, I guess you could say, is that he made it easier to travel in Assyria and to the new parts of the empire by establishing a roadwork. He also was interesting because he established a spy network, meaning that along those roads would be spies who moved out from the central authority of Sargon II to different towns, villages, and it was pretty extensive spy network. He did have law codes that also attempted to unite the country, which he claimed as a tribute to Hammurabi, which is also a way of using history, although his laws were much harsher. And it was extremely patriarchal, meaning very few rights for women. Okay, and in Sargon II's mind, anybody who didn't accept the god of Assur would be an enemy. So even the people that he conquered, that were conquered in the lands that he conquered, and they were probably what are called henotheists, meaning they had many different gods, who knows, and they were forced to believe in Assur, which is, you know, that would be difficult to force somebody to believe in a different sort of spiritual life than you have. And he forced tributes or taxes from all of the people that he governed, and he would in fact have his henchmen show up yearly to collect those taxes. He was known for mutilation, rape, mass deportations. He even had artwork that celebrated, you know, his ruthlessness. So what I want you to do is now look on your PowerPoint or look on page 62. You'll see where Assyria is. And if you look on page 63 or your PowerPoint, you can see that there's a picture or a frieze, a sculpture done on a wall of Neo-Assyrian, really, they call it Neo-Assyrian atrocities. And, excuse me, that standing army would be responsible for getting people in line by using these atrocities. He had a huge army, he had steel weapons, he had shock troops that were heavily armed, and he would lay siege on different communities that refused to kowtow to his rule. Excuse me. That's sort of the story of the terrible rule of the Neo-Assyrians, the new Assyrians. The legacy of Neo-Assyrian power, you could imagine, is hatred. And you could read in your book that from 704 to approximately 681 BC, Assyria was rebuilt, including Nineveh, and you can look at the names of them. There were many internal reforms, cleansings. They wrote modern editions of the Epic of Gilgamesh. They brought back the gardens in Babylon, which were called the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. So it became a period of, again, much richness, fullness, reform. And in the end, the Chaldeans, along with the Indo-European Medes, who were in Persia, really destroyed what remained of that Sargon Neo Assyrian vicious culture. And the Neo Assyrian Empire is destroyed really in approximately 627 BCE. And the Chaldeans also conquer the kingdom of Judah in 587 and 586. Full stop. Let's look at the Persians for a second at about the same time. The rise of the Persians occurs really after, look at your map so you know where they are. Persia is, of course, Iran today. And they really succeed the Neo Assyrian Empire and the Chaldeans. And the Persian Empire is going to last until today, really. It was very proud, it was quite different. And we're going to look then at the Persian Empire of, how many of you have heard of Cyrus the Great? He became ruler of all of the Persians in approximately 539. He threw off the lordship of the Medes, Medes. He actually conquered a place called Lydia and mined their gold and silver. So he got more and more wealthy. In fact, there's a great story, I think, that your book tells you, that story of how Cyrus invades Croesus, who was the head of Lydia, and there's the oracle has a bet about who's going to win, which civilization is going to survive, the Lydians or Croesus. What really happens is the oracle says, yeah, one of the empires in this battle is going to be destroyed and fall flat. It turns out it was Croesus, his empire, even though he took it to mean the opposite. So Croesus in Lydia launched a war against the Persians in 546, and loses. And then the Persians are going to annex Lydia, which has the first coins in the world are produced, silver and gold coins. And look at where it is on the map. And they're going to annex all of Lydia and all the wealth and the mines and the coins in 546 BCE. Cyrus, who becomes the Cyrus the Great, the king of Persia, he is going to invade Mesopotamia, including Babylon. And who's in Mesopotamia and Babylon? All of those Hebrews that had been captured by the Neo-Assyrians. Remember, they were kicked out. All of that whole area of Judah and Israel, they were kicked out. They were in exile in Babylon and in Mesopotamia. And Cyrus, when he gets there, is going to have tremendously enlightened policies. Considerable, he's going to encourage the Persians, unlike the Mesopotamians, to follow their, have self-determination. Culturally, what can we say about the Persians? They are very well read, very well educated. They are a ruler with a much lighter hand. And so they're going to really consolidate all their military gains. They're going to improve the state administration or the bureaucracy, which are going to be called satrapies. And they're going to allow people to, maintain their temples. Persepolis is going to be named the capital, which I want to stop here 1 second. Let me finish here. And they're going to build a royal road. That's all on your maps. So throughout the entire area of Persia, they're going to develop their own postal system that goes along the road. They're also going to have spy networks. They're going to try to expand into Greece in about 100 years. We'll talk about that later. And they have a model of imperialism or setting up the state, more light handed, good bureaucracy, roads, postal, etc. That is going to last quite a while. And they have a reputation, of course, as I'm saying, for being quite tolerant and developing a very rich culture. Now, time out. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. It's funny, this reminded me of it because satraps, which sort of stands for like like a city or a county bureaucracy. There's a woman named Satrapi who wrote a comic novel called Persepolis. It's fantastic. You can read it, it's fun to read, and it's about what happened uh, with her family, when they had to leave Iran. And so it's interesting. It's fascinating. I think her name is Julie Satrapi, very Persian name, and she talks about her own family's experience recently having to leave Iran. Now, one of the reasons I'm also kind of want to say something else. Um, One of the other things that Cyrus did that makes him a hero to the Hebrew people is that, believe it or not, even though they'd been in exile all this time, when he took over Mesopotamia, 546, whatever, he took all the Hebrews, supposedly, that were living in Mesopotamia, whether they were from Israel, the north of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, or the south, Judah, and he moved them back to that kingdom, that area. And he took all those people that had been exiled from the Hebrew kingdom and brought them back. This is why many Hebrew people believe that Cyrus is a prophet. Technically, he's not religiously. However, historically, he's considered by many in the Hebrew kingdom as a prophet. He even, once he let them go back, set them free, let them go back out of captivity from the Neo Assyrians who'd forced them into exile, he actually started to rebuild Jerusalem for them, gave them a head start, which is kind of interesting. Um, the thing I really want to say is that from this moment on, the ideas and the intellect and the arts of Persia are going to become a very significant civilization. The religious thinking of the early Persians is something called Zoroastrianism. Um, and I don't know how many of you have ever heard of the religion Baha'i. There's a Baha'i temple in Haifa, Israel, and there are Baha'i all around the world. They believe in sort of one world, one religion. They consider themselves, um, uh, the um, legacy of Zoroastrianism. Now, Zoroastrianism, I want to talk about for one moment because it helps us understand monotheism, which we'll end the chapter with today. Um, the earliest faith in Iran or in Persia is this thing called Zoroastrianism. It's a universal, they believed it was a universal faith. And the individual in charge of it was somebody called Zarathustra. And he wanted really to get rid of all the superstition with local religions and local gods. He wanted to get rid of all that. He wanted to get rid of, so what can we say, polytheism, the belief in many gods, wanted to get rid of animal sacrifices, wanted to get rid of the belief in magic. So he created this idea for most Persians called Ahura Mazda, which means, and it's all in your book, the wise Lord. He thought that Ahura Mazda stood for light, truth, and righteousness. There was an evil to the wise Lord, to Ahura Mazda, which was like they call it a counter deity, Ahriman. But in this belief of Zoroastrianism,